The city screamed past my window, a blur of neon and ambition. But all I could hear was the thud of my own heart. I was Lady again, rushing to a boardroom where egos sharper than my stilettos waited to tear into my pitch. Then he turned, my driver, all of 20 years old, and said, "You look like you're carrying the world. Lady, want to tell me where it's heaviest?" His name was Ezra, and he drove like he lived, fast, fearless, with a grin that could disarm a bomb. I'd seen him before. This kid with a leather jacket and eyes that seemed to hold secrets older than his years. San Francisco was his playground. And I, Claire Winters, was just another passenger in his beat-up Prius. A 38-year-old marketing exec who'd clawed her way to the top of a glass-ceilinged world. My life was a checklist, meetings, deadlines, the occasional glass of Pinot to dull the ache of a marriage that had fizzled out years ago. But Ezra, he was chaos in human form, and I had no idea how much I needed that. It was a Thursday, the kind of day where the fog clung to the bay like a bad memory. I'd booked the ride to get me from my Nob Hill apartment to a downtown skyscraper for a make-or-break presentation. My phone buzzed with emails, each one a jab at my sanity. But Ezra's voice cut through the noise. "You ever just stop?" he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were brown, warm, but there was something else there. Spark. A challenge. I laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Stop. Kid. I don't even slow down." He smirked, undeterred, and cranked the radio. Some indie band I didn't know filled the car, all raw vocals and pulsing drums. "Bet I can make you slow down," he said, his tone teasing but with an edge that made my pulse skip. I rolled my eyes, but something in me stirred. Maybe it was the way he said it, like he knew something I didn't. Or maybe it was just exhaustion finally cracking through my polished exterior. We hit a red light, and he turned fully in his seat, one arm slung over the headrest. "What's the rush, Claire? World's not gonna end if you miss one meeting." My name on his lips caught me off guard. Must have seen it on the app. I bristled, ready to snap back, but his gaze held me. It wasn't flirtatious. Not exactly. It was curious. Like he saw past the power suit and the practiced smile to the woman who hadn't felt alive in years. "I don't have time for detours," I said, but my voice lacked its usual steel. He just grinned, and when the light turned green, he didn't head toward downtown. Instead, he veered left, toward the waterfront. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my hand already on my phone, ready to report him. "Trust me," he said simply, and for reasons I couldn't explain. I didn't hit send. Maybe it was the way the city lights danced across his face, or the fact that I hadn't done anything reckless since college. Whatever it was, I let him drive. The Embarcadero stretched out before us, the Bay Bridge glittering like a promise in the distance. Ezra pulled over near a pier, the kind where tourists snapped selfies and seagulls fought over scraps. "Get out," he said, not a command, but an invitation. I should have refused. I had a presentation, a career, a life that didn't include following a 20-year-old stranger into the unknown. But my hand was already on the door. We walked along the pier, the salt air sharp in my lungs. Ezra didn't say much at first, just pointed out a street performer juggling fire, his laughter bright and unguarded. "You ever think about who you'd be if you didn't have to be you?" he asked, his voice low, almost lost in the crash of waves. I froze. No one had ever asked me that. Not my ex-husband, not my colleagues, not even myself. "I'm fine being me," I lied, but my throat tightened. Ezra tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve. "Sure," he said, but his tone suggested he didn't buy it. He kicked a pebble into the water, then turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. "I'm trans. You know. Took me years to figure out who I was. Still figuring it out." But you're running from something. And I'm betting it's not just a meeting. His words hit like a slap, raw and unfiltered. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was just a kid who didn't know me. But the truth clawed at my chest. I'd spent years building a life that looked perfect on paper, but it was a house of cards, and I was terrified of what lay beneath. My marriage to Paul had been a slow death. Each of us too busy to notice we'd stopped loving each other. My career was a treadmill set to sprint, and I'd been running so long I'd forgotten why. Ezra didn't push. He just walked beside me, his presence steady, grounding. We stopped at a food truck, and he bought us tacos, insisting I try the spicy al pastor. Live a little, Claire, he teased, and for the first time in years, I did. The heat of the taco burned my tongue, and I really laughed, spilling sauce on my blouse and not caring. By the time we got back to the car, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. I'd missed my meeting, and my phone was a war zone of missed calls. But I felt free. Ezra leaned against the car, watching me with that same curious intensity. So, he said, where to now? I didn't know. For the first time in forever, I didn't have a plan. And maybe that was the point. The city's pulse thrummed through the car as Ezra drove, the skyline a jagged silhouette against the twilight. I should have been furious. My career was likely imploding with every unanswered email, but instead, I felt a reckless thrill, like I was 18 again, sneaking out past curfew. You're insane, I told him, half laughing, half panicked, as he wove through traffic toward God knows where. Insane's better than boring, he shot back, his grin a flash of defiance in the dark. Ezra was a force of nature, all sharp edges and soft truths, and I was caught in his orbit. He didn't ask where I wanted to go next, and I didn't offer. Part of me wanted to see how far this detour would take us. We ended up in the Mission District, the air thick with the scent of grilled corn and paint from fresh murals. Ezra parked near a dive bar with a flickering neon sign that read Luna's. You ever been here? He asked, already halfway out of the car. I hadn't. My world was polished boardrooms and overpriced wine bars, not gritty joints with sticky floors and jukeboxes blaring old punk. But I followed him, my heels clicking against the uneven sidewalk, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and exhilaration. Inside, Luna's was a riot of color and noise. Drag queens in glittering gowns held court at the bar, their laughter louder than the music. A couple swayed in a corner, their hands tangled, oblivious to the world. Ezra fit right in, high-fiving a bartender with purple hair and sliding into a booth like he owned the place. I felt like an intruder, my tailored coat and briefcase screaming outsider. But Ezra's ease was contagious. Relax, he said, pushing a beer toward me. No one's judging you here. I wanted to believe him, but years of conditioning made me scan the room, waiting for eyes to narrow, for whispers to start. I'd spent my life curating perfection, hiding any crack that might reveal the mess beneath. Ezra, Thuff, was unapologetically himself, scars and all. How do you do it? I asked, my voice barely audible over the music. Just be you. He leaned back, his expression softening. Wasn't always easy. Growing up, I was the kid who didn't fit. Wrong body, wrong name, wrong everything. Took a lot of fights, mostly with myself, to get here. He tapped his chest, right over his heart. But once I stopped hiding, the world got a lot bigger. His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through me. I'd never had to fight for my identity the way Ezra had, but I knew what it was to hide. My divorce had been quiet, clinical, a mutual surrender to indifference. I told myself it was fine, that I was fine, but the truth was I'd locked away every part of me that felt too much, too messy, too real. Ezra saw that, somehow, and he wasn't letting me look away. The night blurred into a montage of moments, Ezra dragging me to the dance floor. His laughter bright as we stumbled through a terrible two-step. A drag queen named Sapphire tossing me a feather boa and winking. The taste of cheap beer and the burn of honesty as Ezra told me about his first love. A boy who'd broken his heart, but taught him he was worth loving. I told him two things I hadn't said aloud in years. How I'd married Paul because he was safe. Predictable. How I'd buried my dreams of writing poetry under the weight of corporate success. How I hadn't cried. Really cried. Since I was a kid. By the time we left Luna's, it was past midnight, and the city felt differentless, like a machine grinding me down. More like a living thing, full of possibility. Ezra drove me home, the silence between us comfortable, heavy with unspoken questions. When he pulled up to my building, I didn't get out right away. Why me? I asked, my voice small. Why'd you take me on this detour? He looked at me, his eyes steady, searching. Because you looked like you needed it, he said. And maybe I did too. I went to bed that night with my phone still buzzing, my blouse still stained with taco sauce, and a feeling I couldn't name blooming in my chest. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running out of time. The next morning, I woke to a world that hadn't stopped spinning. My inbox was a battlefield of angry emails from my boss, passive-aggressive ones from colleagues, and a curt voicemail from the client I'd blown off. I should have cared more, but all I could think about was Ezra's grin, the way he'd looked at me like I was more than my job, more than my mistakes. I booked him again that evening, telling myself it was just convenience. He was waiting outside my building. Same leather jacket, same easy smile. Back for more, he teased, holding the car door open like I was royalty. I rolled my eyes but slid into the back seat, the familiarity of it grounding me. Where to, boss? He asked, and I hesitated. I didn't have a destination. Not really. I just wanted more. More of whatever this was. Surprise me, I said, and his laugh filled the car like sunlight. He took me to a community garden in the Tenderloin. Of all places, a patch of green tucked between concrete and chaos. It was run by a group of queer activists, he explained, who'd turned a vacant lot into something alive. There were sunflowers taller than me, rows of tomatoes, and a mural of a phoenix rising from rainbow flames. Ezra knew everyone there, tossing out nicknames and hugs like he was family. He introduced me to Lena, a non-binary gardener with a buzz cut and a warm smile, who handed me a trowel and told me to get my hands dirty. I laughed, protested me nails, my blouse, but Ezra was already kneeling in the dirt, planting basil with a focus that made my heart ache. I joined him, the earth cool and gritty under my fingers. And for a moment, I wasn't Claire Winters, marketing exec. I was just Claire, a woman who'd forgotten how to feel the ground beneath her. Lena told stories as we worked about the garden's fight to survive gentrification, about the kids who came here to feel safe. Ezra listened, his face soft, but he kept stealing glances at me, like he was checking to see if I was still there, still real. When Lena mentioned a fundraiser to save the garden, I surprised myself by offering to help. I know people, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I can get you sponsors. Ezra's eyes lit up, and for the first time, I felt like I was using my power for something that mattered. We stayed until the sun set, the garden glowing under string lights. On the drive back, Ezra was quiet, but his silence felt different, charged. You're not what I expected, he said finally, his voice low. Thought you were just another suit. But you're more. I didn't know how to respond. No one had called me more before. I'd always been enough or not enough defined by my output, my results. But Ezra saw something else, and it scared me as much as it thrilled me. Back at my apartment, I lingered in the car again. You're not just a driver, are you? I asked, half joking, half desperate to understand him. He smirked, but his eyes were serious. "I'm whatever I need to be," he said. "Question is, who are you when you're not trying to be perfect?" I didn't have an answer, but his question followed me upstairs, echoing in the empty spaces of my life. That night, I pulled out an old notebook, one I hadn't touched since college, and started writing. Not emails, not reports, poetry. Words poured out, messy and raw, about a woman lost in a city of glass, chasing a boy who drove too fast and saw too much. Days bled into weeks, and Ezra became a constant in my life. I booked him for every ride, even when I didn't need to go anywhere. He took me to places I'd never have found on my own: a queer poetry slam in Oakland, a drag brunch in the Castro, a quiet bookstore where he read me passages from Audre Lorde until my eyes burned with unshed tears. Each detour chipped away at the walls I'd built, and I started to see myself through his eyes, not a failure, not a machine, but a woman capable of feeling, of wanting, of being. Work was a different story. My stunt with the missed meeting had cost me a promotion, and the whispers in the office were louder now, questioning my focus, my commitment. I should have cared, but Ezra's world was so much bigger than mine, so much brighter. He told me about his life growing up in a small town where different was a dirty word. Coming out at 16, leaving home at 18 to find himself in the city. He'd faced rejection, violence, but he wore his scars like badges, proof he'd survived. One night, he drove me to Twin Peaks, the city sprawling below us like a glittering dream. We sat on the hood of his car, sharing a thermos of coffee, the cold biting through my coat. "You ever think about love?" he asked, his voice soft, almost shy. I froze, my heart stuttering. Love was a word I'd buried with my marriage, a concept too dangerous to touch. "I don't know if I believe in it anymore," I admitted, staring at the city to avoid his eyes. He didn't laugh or judge. He just nodded, like he understood. "I do," he said simply, "even when it hurts. Especially then." His words hung between us, heavy with possibility. I wanted to ask what he meant, who he'd loved, but fear stopped me. Instead, I told him about Paul, about the years I'd spent trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect professional, only to lose myself in the process. Ezra listened, his hand brushing mine, a fleeting touch that sent sparks through me. When he dropped me off that night, he lingered, his hand on the gear shift, his eyes searching mine. "You're allowed to want things, Claire," he said, "even if they scare you." I nodded, my throat tight, and watched him drive away, his taillights fading into the night. At home, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his hand on mine, the way his voice had softened when he said love. I was 38, successful, independent and terrified. Because for the first time in years, I wanted something more than a corner office. I wanted to be seen, to be known, to be enough just as I was. The garden fundraiser became my lifeline, a way to channel the energy Ezra had sparked in me. I called in every favor, leveraged every contact, and within weeks, we'd secured enough sponsors to keep the lot safe for another year. Ezra was there for every meeting, every late-night planning session, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. He'd tease me when I got too serious, make me laugh when I wanted to scream, and slowly, I started to feel like myself again, not the polished exec, but the woman who'd once dreamed of changing the world. One night, after a particularly grueling day, he drove me to Ocean Beach. The waves roared, wild and untamed, and we walked barefoot in the sand, the cold biting at our toes. "You're different now," he said, his voice almost lost in the wind. "Lighter, like you're not carrying the world anymore." I wanted to tell him it was because of him, because of the way he saw me, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I asked, "Why do you keep doing this? Driving me around, showing me these places?" He stopped walking, his silhouette sharp against the moonlit waves. "Because you remind me of who I could have been," he said. "If I'd stayed scared, stayed small." His honesty broke something in me, a dam I'd built around my heart. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him, to see the freckles dusting his nose. "Ezra," I whispered, and his name felt like a confession. He looked at me, his eyes wide, unguarded, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. But he didn't. He just smiled, soft and sad, and said, "You're gonna be okay, Claire. Better than okay." We stood there, the ocean singing its endless song, and I realized I was falling for him, not just his charm or his courage, but the way he made me feel alive. It wasn't about his age or his gender or the million reasons it shouldn't work. It was about the truth he carried, the truth he saw in me. Back in the car, he played a song I didn't know, something soft and haunting. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me, and when he dropped me off, I didn't want to leave. "See you tomorrow?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded, his smile a promise, and I carried it with me into the night. The fundraiser was a triumph. The garden was packed with people, activists, artists, families dancing under string lights to a local band's beat. I wore a dress I hadn't touched in years, red and flowing, and Ezra's eyes lit up when he saw me. "Damn, Claire," he said, whistling low. "You're stealing the show." I laughed, but my heart was racing. We worked the crowd together, charming sponsors, thanking volunteers. Lena pulled me aside at one point, their eyes twinkling. "You and Ezra? Huh. Never seen him this happy." I blushed, stammering, but they just winked and walked away. As the night wound down, Ezra grabbed my hand and pulled me to a quiet corner of the garden, where the sunflowers stood like silent guardians. "You did this," he said, his voice thick with pride. "You saved this place." I shook my head, tears prickling. "We did it. You showed me how." He stepped closer, his hand still holding mine, and the air between us crackled. "Claire," he said, and the way he said my name made my knees weak. "I need to tell you something." My heart stopped, but before he could continue, a shout broke the moment. Lena, calling us back to cut the ceremonial ribbon. The rest of the night was a blur of applause and champagne, but Ezra's words hung over me like a storm cloud. When he drove me home, the silence was heavy, charged with things unsaid. I couldn't take it anymore. "What were you going to say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He parked, turned to me, his face a mix of fear and resolve. "I'm leaving," he said, and my world tilted. "Got a job offer in Seattle. Community outreach, working with queer youth. It's what I've always wanted." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "But I don't want to leave you." The words hit like a punch. I wanted to beg him to stay, to tell him I was falling in love with him. But I saw the fire in his eyes, the same fire that had pulled me out of my own darkness. "You have to go," I said, my voice breaking. "This is your dream." He nodded, tears shining in his eyes, and reached for my hand. "You're my dream too," he whispered, and then he kissed me soft, fierce, a collision of everything we'd been holding back. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and promises, of beginnings and endings. And when we pulled apart, I was crying. Ezra left 2 weeks later. I drove him to the airport, my hands shaking on the wheel of his Prius, insisted I keep it until he came back. If he came back. We didn't say much, just held hands across the console, the radio playing softly. At the terminal, he hugged me, his leather jacket warm against my cheek. "You changed me, Claire," he said. "Don't stop being you." I watched him disappear into the crowd, my heart a tangle of grief and gratitude. He'd taken me on a detour that had shattered my world and rebuilt it, piece by piece. I wasn't the same woman he'd picked up that foggy Thursday. and I never would be again. Back home, I threw myself into the garden, into poetry, into living. I quit my job, started freelancing, and began writing a book about the people I'd met, the places Ezra had shown me. It wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness was a physical ache, when I missed his laugh, his touch, his relentless belief in me. But I kept going, because he'd taught me that love wasn't just about holding on. It was about letting go, about trusting yourself to find your way. A year later, I got a postcard from Seattle. Ezra's handwriting was messy, joyful, telling me about the kids he was helping, the life he was building. At the bottom, he'd written, "You're still my favorite Detour." I smiled, tucked the postcard into my notebook, and kept writing. I saw myself differently now, not as a woman defined by her failures or her successes, but as someone capable of love, of growth, of being more. Ezra had been my guide, my spark, my mirror. And though our paths had diverged, he'd given me the greatest gift, the courage to see myself, to love myself, to live a life that was mine.